Pressures are rising in the US against Washington's support for Saudi Arabia over a deadly military campaign it has waged on Yemen for almost 3 years now. A group of US senators have submitted a draft resolution in which they have called for an end to the US military support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen's war. The draft resolution is being pushed forward by Senators Bernie Sanders, Mike Lee and Chris Murphy. It will force the Congress to vote for the first time on whether the US should continue to support Saudi Arabia in the war in Yemen. This is already being seen as a rare effort by Congress to claw back its war powers from the executive branch. But regardless of its fate, the resolution nonetheless shows some voices of dissatisfaction with America's military support for the Saudis are eventually growing louder. The resolution drafted by the 3 congressmen intends to exploit a powerful but rarely activated provision concerning America's overseas military involvement. The provision would give the Congress the authority to overrule the president and withdraw troops if it believes the conflict is not authorized. This is now being treated as an acknowledgement that any war in which America involves itself would be unconstitutional unless the Congress approves it. And it has, to the same effect, raised questions over the legality of Washington's military involvements in Yemen, as well as other crisis points like Syria. Many are now asking if the Congress really can introduce a change in America's policy of involvement in Yemen anytime soon, or whether the bid would be given the cold shoulder in Washington.
If you look at the War Powers Act and when it came into force, this was coming towards the end of the Vietnam War, and it was brought in because America wanted to avoid that situation again. Unfortunately, it hasn't avoided it. As we all know, America's been at war in many countries since then. Obviously, we welcome any initiatives that can end the war, but it's political pressure that has to be put on the Saudi regime to end the hostilities, rather than American support for it. Of course, America and the UK and several other European countries have been helping the Saudis, arming the Saudis, funding the Saudis to go into this war, which has had catastrophic events for the people of Yemen. And that's what has to happen. There has to be a political solution to end this war and keep the Saudi regime within place.
Under the US Constitution, the president cannot declare war without the approval of Congress. However, recent administrations, through the use of drone strikes and so-called special operators, have expanded the interpretation of when a commander-in-chief can send US troops abroad. The resolution that has been drafted by Sanders, Lee and Murphy is meant to address this. It is specifically meant to revive a decades-long debate over reclaiming Congress's constitutional role in declaring war.
War in itself is abhorrent and has to be avoided and should be avoided at any cost. Whether a war is legal or illegal is irrelevant. A war shouldn't be happening in the Yemen. These are very fine arguments that people get into. Just because the president has the legal authority to go to war doesn't mean it's morally right. So there's the question of legal rights and moral rights have to have some kind of balance. And there's an immorality in this war in terms of the deaths, in terms of the sanctions, in terms of the starvation. We've all seen the media pictures of children and adults starving to death in Yemen and the disease that's been unleashed there. And so these media pictures are obviously having some effect, and there is a movement to encourage America to stop supporting the Saudi regime. But we know historically, through the Bush administration, that the links between the Saudi regime and the United States are very, very deep. And something like this can only scratch the surface. There has to be much more political power.
A war that Saudi Arabia, together with a group of its allies, launched on Yemen and has already claimed 13,000 lives, most of them civilian lives. It has literally destroyed a nation, put the country on the brink of famine, and created what the United Nations openly describes as the worst humanitarian crisis of the modern time. But the world does not consider Saudi Arabia and its allies as the only culprits. Those like the US and Britain that are providing them with weapons to continue the war are also accomplices. The resolution, which is now on the agenda of the Congress, could introduce some changes to this.